So today's session is about source of funds for commercialization. Just like what Dr. Jaspal mentioned earlier, having more than 10 years in the intellectual property and technology commercialization front, I had the privilege of assisting various entrepreneurs, researchers, universities in protecting their IP and strategizing innovation towards commercialization. So today I would like to share with everyone of today's webinar participants and as well as the organizing committee on what it takes, the mechanisms involved in terms of applying a successful funding, as well as looking at an investment-friendly business plan and how we can breach the valley of gap or valley of debt in the Malaysian commercialization ecosystem. So managing various national funding programs in the past, I had the opportunity to handhold various researchers and entrepreneurs by facilitating an end-to-end support system. And today's session will be about sharing those experiences with you, and also what are the parameters involved in terms of preparing ourselves in terms of applying fundings for pre-commercialization and commercialization. So allow me to share my slides. I hope everyone can hear me loud and clear. Okay.
Yes, we can see
Good.
it and it's clear.
All right. So I'll walk you through on today's presentation. Just a moment. Okay. So what we are going to look into is, why is commercialization important apart from research? What causes the value of debt in the commercialization ecosystem? The nuts and bolts of commercialization. So what it takes to make commercialization work. We are not just looking into funding, but also the entire ecosystem or the cycle chain of commercialization. And then we are going to look into, of course, the interesting part is the various sources of funding. But I would like to just explain here before when we are going further into my presentation, that the sources of funding that we are going to discuss is more on startups, pre-commercialization and commercialization funding, as well as private investments. Yeah. And also, we are going to look at the success factors of commercialization and parameters for applying funds. So, why is commercialization is important, and what is commercialization is all about? Commercialization of university research findings is one of the critical agenda in national higher education strategic plan, as well as our latest MOSTI 1010 framework. So commercialization is basically the process of bringing innovations or research outputs to marketplace by contributing socio-economic growth of a country via a quadruple helix system. It also defined as making the first sales, right? So it's not just bringing to the marketplace, but also generating the revenue. So in our ecosystem, as researchers in the educational institution, research institution, we are blessed with abundance of various types of research grants to promote innovation and university research. So these funds are, of course, provided by MOSTI and MOHI accordingly. But what about after the research output is developed? So we are also, the government has actually designed pre-commercialization and commercialization grants from various government agencies to accelerate these IPs into marketplace. So accelerating technology commercialization. So the translation of an innovation into a product for commercialization can be done in two ways: through licensing an IP to a company, or through the creation of a spin-off or a startup entity which licenses the IP created by a university. So I'm sure, I hope that everyone's wearing their entrepreneur cap here, and to have the that broad mindset on how commercialization is being done and what is required by our funding agencies. So commercialization is the afterthought, but that's what most people think. But what we need to understand is it actually starts in the beginning itself. You start thinking, where am I heading to when you come up with a research idea or any form of idea? So even if it's an industry collaboration or you're coming up with an idea for a research work, you start looking at the opportunity, looking at defining the value proposition. What is it going to do for the society? How is the society and the country is going to benefit out of the research that I am going to develop? So then you're going to progress into developing it into a project. So translation of this idea, protecting it into a viable product or a demonstrable prototype. Then you look into venture building or going into a marketplace by partnering with industries or creating an entity by yourself with the credibility and the trust and the confidence that you have that you can make it to the market, not only in Malaysia, but you're looking at the long-term scale, right? Okay, we are having some interesting conversations here. So then I hope it's muted, yeah? So then, so what is the importance of commercialization? So sometimes the researchers will ask me, Ms. Biro, so why do we need to commercialize? Can I just stop at research level? I file my IP, I publish my papers, I'm happy. So it all depends. The government is putting so much money into our R&D. We are tapping these funds and grants to come up with research outputs. Our university is taking pride in this research outputs. So in return, commercialization is about giving back not only to yourself, to the community, to the university, to the society, and also to the country, right? So there are few pillars of importance of commercialization or benefits of commercialization, such as societal benefit, economic growth, talent development, entrepreneurship, industry collaboration, new intellectual properties. So what are these pillars is all about? So when you're creating a research output, it has to be impactful, not just in terms of monetary value, but also in terms of giving something back to the society for the good of the society. So societal benefit is the key driver behind commercializing new innovations, and it should be shouldn't be just limited to economic benefit. So you are actually satisfied that your innovation or your research can be applied and people are benefiting from the idea creation of what you've created. Economic growth is about generating new revenue stream in the sectors or in the targeted marketplace or market segment, creating job opportunities and not only just locally, regionally, as well as globally. So increasing the GDP of a country. Also giving returns to the university as well. So talent development, what is talent development? How is talent development is contributing is through the creation of new skill set, through spin-off creations, through educating technology transfer professionals, certifying professionals that can actually help in the commercialization processes. So when universities have created successful spin-offs commercialization success stories, they would like to retain this talent within their ecosystem. Directly and indirectly, you are also promoting market-driven intellectual properties. So the IPs, the quality of IPs that you are creating will be commercially viable and of high quality as well. So these IPs can then be an asset in terms of economic growth. Also, developing the innovation culture within oneself, right? So if you're a researcher and you're looking at, bringing your research to the next frontier, you're creating the DNA entrepreneurship within you. And of course, this can be actually very, significant in the long run, whereby you are able to create jobs. You are able to create companies, different types of products, and going into the market that will benefit many people. What about industry collaboration? So universities can serve as a supplemental R&D resources consisting of knowledge transfer, pipeline of innovations, and laboratory facilities to industry partners who serve as a conduit for translating research to broader market. What we need to understand is innovation doesn't happen by itself. So it happens through a collaborative network. So we gain commercialization provides an opportunity to engage industry partners, government agencies, investors, and other businesses by bridging the gap between the academia and industry. So this can all be done if we have a solid or commercially viable IPs and through a technology transfer process that provides a new way of universities to disseminate its knowledge and also the solution for the good of society, also building trust and credibility among investors and also industry players. So what is the big gap? So, this is a big question that the government is trying to address, trying to take the necessary measures. And I'm actually very impressed at how our government is moving towards always refining the framework to assist and to promote innovation to the next level, to drive our country towards the knowledge-driven economy. So Malaysia spent about 1.4% of its GDP on R&D in 2016. This is according to the World Bank report in 2019. But what we have actually realized from this study is we have actually spent so much. Yes, we have actually produced higher level of collaborative research and publication. However, our rate of commercialization of research output remains low. So the big question is why and how are we going to tackle this? So, and also did we notice, yes, in terms of R&D, industry R&D is about 8.6% compared to our neighboring country, Singapore 48% and Japan about 64%. If you can see these two charts in front of you, the first chart here actually shows, or the graph shows the R&D expenditure that the government has put in over the years. So as you can see, as the research and development expenditure increases, our intellectual property filing is not as promising as it should be. So the local filings in Malaysia remains rather low. In 2017, it is still below 2,000 compared to foreign filings in Malaysia at about 5,978. So why is this happening? Let's see. So why? There's lack of or low market-driven solutions. Misalignment of expectations between industry and academics, weak end user engagement and industry collaboration. So we are still trying to work in our own bubble. You know, researchers trying to work in their research bubble, industries are working in their industry bubble. So where are we going to strike the synergy? And that is what's causing all these first three elements. Many intellectual properties are not commercially viable. So based on my experience over the years, consulting universities, researchers, we notice that that most of the IPs are just at TRL 2, TRL 3, and it's not moving beyond. And how many of these IPs are actually commercially viable? Because most of our IPs are driven or filed for the purpose of publications, for the purpose of exhibitions, to win our medals. That is good. But how are we going to now put more value to these IPs that we have filed? So this is something that we really need to look into if we are going to participate in the commercialization ecosystem. Also, the mindset and attitude towards commercialization. As researchers, it is not, I'm sure many people will say, oh, how are we going to commercialize? It's not our forte. We are researchers. actually, I hats off to all the researchers out there. I know how hard you all have been working, juggling between the admin responsibilities, research responsibilities, lecturing, as well as now you also have to look into commercialization. So it's about prioritizing, strategizing, and also fitting and understanding what you are developing, what are you working on, what is the landscape like. So getting exposed, you got to think outside of the box, not just apart from getting all that merits into the CV tag. So we got to change, participate into trainings and workshops, speak to industry partners, funders, successful spin-off entrepreneurs or researchers who have made it into the commercialization cycle change. We've got to think out of the box to participate in this new knowledge-driven economy. Lack of desire among researchers to commercialize R&D outputs, that is because they don't know how to do it. So that is why there is a lack of desire, because most often they are bogged down with so many responsibilities and they do not know which channel to go into when it comes to taking their innovation to the next level. And also based on my recent stakeholder engagement session with ITMA, MITE, and also British Council under the Newton Oklahoma, we also identified there is a slight gap in our policies, innovation policy, between MOE and MOE and also in terms of MOSTI. So universities, researchers, they are filing IPs, they are doing researches in accordance to MIRA, CETARA, or QS rating, fine. But MOSTI here is telling researchers, we are putting so much money, where is the commercialization output? So they are defining the technology transfer ecosystem, the commercialization aspect. So researchers or university decision makers, they are in the both angles. Like, so where do we go when it comes to commercialization? How are we going to support our research into commercialization? And which policy are we going to look into when it comes to responsibilities, when it comes to income distribution, when it comes to spin-offs, and how are these KPIs going to be recognized under the ecosystem. So this is something that I think the stakeholders are also looking into refining and trying to amalgamate some of these scopes so that we have a smooth policy and informed policy for technology transfer. Poor marketing approach to downstream innovations. Yes, there are some universities who are doing it very well, and many are still catching up to refine their marketing approach. So we are not shouting out loud when it comes to our innovation. We do have, I wouldn't say all our innovations or IPs are not commercially viable. We do have very good IPs. We do have good research outputs, but it is not coming out because we are not shouting enough. I think it's so we need to find that platform to do so. Limited marketplace for researchers and industry players to buy and sell or cross-license R&D output. So let's look at the journey of commercialization. So journey of commercialization, as you can see from here, it might look very straightforward, but actually it's not quite, because sometimes you need to have a few components in terms of getting from one stage to another towards journey of commercialization. So it all starts from idea or research, where, regardless of university, SMEs, public research institutes, or you're an individual or grassroots innovator. So when you have an idea generated, you need to do a validation. So once you have validated this idea, you look into protecting it in terms of IP protection. So then you identify what is the viable IP protection that I need for my idea, right? So let's then you will have to identify if this is it's a viable idea. It has a marketplace. You got to do the assessment first. You don't just want to file an IP. Is there a market potential? Who will I be collaborating if I file this? Or can this, go on its own? What is the value if I file this IP? So some of these factors needs to be looked into. More importantly, the technical and market assessment needs to be done here. So then you look into the types of IP that you need. Is it a trademark? Is it a patent in terms of product patent, system patent, or are we going to look into industrial design, GI, copyright, or it can be a combination of a few of these IPs filed for the purpose of the idea or the solution that you're coming up with. But what happens is most often after we file our IP, we just have we do not actually translate it to next level. Probably we will do a very rough TRL3 kind of prototype development. Some don't even have a demonstrable prototype. So this is very crucial when it comes to bringing our research output to the next level of commercialization. Then licensing or startup. So looking at developing this prototype, demonstrating with the relevant industry partners, looking at some validation, initial validation processes, then we will devise a business plan to see once this IP is protected, can this IP be licensed to another company for further development, or do we have enough funds like a prototype fund or industrial fund? Some universities do have that funding mechanism, but I do not know if they still have to further develop it to the next level of pilot scale funding. So that is something that you need to devise within your team to see how you can take this POC to the next level. So you can do that through an integration or collaboration method. So you either work with relevant industry players, or you knock the doors at some supporting agencies, stakeholders to integrate the licensed technology into a product. So this can be actually a market validation process where you can do a pilot, small scale pilot project to see if this, to get some market feedback. Then you move into testing and validation process. New prototype tested and commercial value of invention is confirmed there. So you need to look into, does this need local certification? Does this need international certification? Some products, they can't move without certifications. Some products do not need certifications. So you need to understand during this testing and validation what needs to be looked into. Then test this product to the next level of testing. So tested product will be converted into commercial product. That's where you look into the business plan strategically, the product packaging, the marketing element, and also the commercialization. Then you move on to new product or services brought to market and where it can be sold. So are we just talking about Malaysian market? Is this a halal market? Is this ASEAN market, or for the global market? So technology transfer is a form or is identified as a commercial vehicle for universities. Licensing is one of the most common ways of achieving the transfer of technology, transfer of knowledge and technology between different parties. So what is out licensing in licensing? So looking at this diagram here, a licensor, here the IP owner would be the university. So the university will generate income through an out licensing model, right? And the licensee could be a company or SME or the spin-off will in-license the IP from the university. So they can be the product developer that is looking at improving the prototype to a commercial scale and making the sales. So licensing fee is can be done as lump sum fee. So it can be maybe a one-off sum payable on assigning the agreement, and it can also be structured. You can look at a staggered payment and so forth. And in terms of royalty, the inventor will then, and the university will enjoy the regular payments to the licensor. So the licensee will pay the royalties to the licensor based on the terms and the agreement that is set in the technology transfer licensing agreement. So licensing can be an option license, can be a patent license, know-how license, trademark or branding license, software license, or it can be a combination of a few licensing approach. So this licensing will, who will be assisting us would be the legal department as well as the technology transfer officers, who will work as an intermediaries between the university researchers and also industry partners to strike a win-win situation. So now let's look at valley of debt, right? So we've understood what is commercialization, but what is the bottleneck in commercialization? As you know, it is a common dilemma where a new innovation may never be transformed into a commercial product, and the implication will be a diminished return on funding for early stage R&D, which has implication for both research economy and commercial economy. So government research grants come at early stage, as you can see from this model, on the level of basic research, right? And so most of the output that we have developed at university level is between, for basic research and proof of concept, is between TRL 1 to 3. So most of us do not, or sometimes we do not quite understand what is TRL, which I will explain later. So the stage of development. So this is being, this parameter or the index of TRL is being used by various government agencies as well as investors to assess the viability of technology that we are putting forward for funding requests. Yeah. So, so the funding here will come at various stages of the commercialization. But what causes the value of that? So we have come up with a research output, we have filed a paper, fine, we have a very raw prototype, or, sometimes we don't even have that. So at TRL 1 to 3. But how do we move from the TRL 3 into TRL 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9? That is always been a bottleneck, not only in Malaysia, but also among various other universities in ASEAN, as well as it's a global dilemma. So this is because the valley of debt is about the gap, right? It's mainly caused by lack of evaluation and validation and funds, right? So evaluation, we do not have enough evaluation, not enough validation in terms of technical validation as well as market validation, and also the funds to translate these research output to the next level into a commercially viable product. So it could be like, most of the time they say, oh, value of debt is caused by funding. What's the point of having the funding and not knowing how to transform this product, right? So there's lack of technical validation, lack of market validation, lack of technology transfer know-how, and also getting the right legal advice for commercialization, weak end user engagement. So it is somehow been our culture. We are not quite getting the end user involved from the beginning of our research to get this validated. So every time towards the need, we get stuck, because when we go to industries, they'll ask, oh, has this been validated? What is the results? What is the efficiency? And we are unable to answer. We are also like, in terms of, this prototype is so raw, I don't like the graphical interface, this is not what we are looking into. So that is because there's always there is a weak end user engagement. So this is something that we really need to come out of our comfort zone and start engaging the stakeholders, the end users, into our research. Misalignment of product positioning with manufacturing. Okay, and also lack of commercial strategy, and also lack of planning resources. So valley of debt doesn't just happen in the beginning of our the development of research output, but it also um, happens in the second phase of commercialization, because when it comes to global rollover, most often we look at a very short term of commercialization. Once we have get funding, okay, we develop it in the pre-com and then we sell it. We have a first customer and that's about it. So after that, what happens? There's another stage of value of debt when it comes to commercialization, because we lack planning for global rollover, for market expansion. We lack resources. We don't have enough manpower. How are we going to sustain this model? So this is something that we need to identify. So all the technology readiness level is where the product evolution starts. Yeah, it shows. So the funders here, both private and government funders, are actually helping us to breach the gap of this valley of debt. Right, so we have government grants in the initial stage, we have other funders, we also have pre-com and commercialization grant helping us to breach the valley of debt. So once you secure this funding, then you look into the collaborators, the companies, the end users, stakeholders, start engaging with the right technology transfer expertise. You can also have a reference points like IPMA and so forth, which I'll also explain later in terms of the technology accelerators and also incubators that we have in Malaysia. So the bottlenecks along the IP commercialization journey for researchers or academics is basically the blocks that I've actually shown in red. Why? Because it's very interesting. We all, our elite minds, we have very good researchers out there in our Malaysian ecosystem. We come up with great ideas. But when it comes to screening the assessment, the validation of our research output ideas is something that we really need to look into. We can't just do a research, file IP, then go into the market, go for exhibitions, file publication, and then wait for someone to just take up our research. So what we need to do is the most crucial part of validation is for commercialization is assessing it on set itself at early stage, screening and assessing the validity of our idea. So looking at the market, looking at the value proposition, looking at the technical strength, looking at the IP strength. Okay, sometimes some of these ideas, they may look great, but then, they actually do not have the viability to be filed because there are so many other prior arts being filed already. So how are we going to be creative? So we need to look into that. File the IP. But of course, you need to, when you're filing this IP, you need to have your long-term plan or mid-term plan. Don't just file it in Malaysia. Speak to your technology transfer officers. Find if there is an opportunity to file in overseas. Go into PCT route or national phase, because like I mentioned, IP is not just for filing an IP for the sake of application or sake of increasing MIRA or SETARA or QS rating, but IP will serve as an economic tool for strategizing businesses. So you may want to, the 12 months grace period that's given once you file in Malaysia, you want to do that assessment and see, okay, where are my markets in Malaysia, in Southeast Asia, ASEAN, Middle East, who will I be working? If it's a halal product, you definitely want to file it in the Middle East, right? So because the market potential is huge there. Indonesia. So you don't limit the viability, the potential of your IP or your solution just for the just in a small market segment. So then you go to the next level, market assessment. Do an intelligence report, study. Okay, work with some experts if you do not know. There are so many reference points that you can actually look into. You can also knock doors with some of the government agencies that are providing such solutions. Then you look into translation of prototype. Translate. We have to translate our research output. So translate it, either you translate it into either TRL5, okay, and wait for an industry or collaborate with an industry to move it to TRL 6, 7, 8, and then work with your technology transfer officers to market these IPs, right? So while doing that, you can simultaneously or alternatively do the testing and market validation through a pilot, small scale pilot project. Maybe, some universities, they have a pool of stakeholders, like Uniten, for example, we have our TNB subsidiaries. So we can do testing and market validation with some of our subsidiaries in terms of testing our system, in terms of testing our, technologies. Then get the feedbacks, improve the prototype. Then, of course, once you've through your marketing efforts, if you have actually found a partner, do an assessment first on your industry partner. See if they're credible. Don't just take a partner for securing a fund, or don't just take a partner just to meet the KPI, but really think of long term, right? So then you look into, okay, what kind of model I should go, licensing, spin-off, outright sales. Sometimes we may not see the big picture. So always be open to ideas, be receptive when you are talking to experts. So consult experts, look at some of the success models that's out there. Then you get your legal or technology transfer officers in the negotiation process. Do not, as researchers by yourself, go and negotiate, because sometimes industry partners are so well seasoned in the business arena, they might shortchange you. So the function of legal technology transfer officers are to strike a win-win situation, and also to protect our researchers and university when it comes to commercialization. Because let's just say you go into a partnership with an industry and the prototype fails or the product fails, based on what you claimed it can do, they can actually sue you. So you want to avoid those kind of issues as well. Then of course you will embark into pre-commercialization stage. So what is pre-commercialization stage? It's about integration and collaboration, productization, testing, validation, regulatory certification, manufacturing deployment at a small scale, scaling up for expansion for commercialization. So it's basically developing your product into a commercially viable product. So you've tested, you've gone into market validation, now you need a commercially viable product. Then you look into a full-scale commercialization. That's where you take a more active approach when it comes to market and branding, promoting the product, distributors, not only in Malaysia but international markets, sustainability of the model. What is the IP strategy moving forward? Sometimes there is background IP. Maybe through the collaboration or further improving, you will have version 1, version 2. So you may want to keep evolving your technology and finding improvements that will have a economic value for your global expansion, and also looking at the strategy for your global rollover. So what we really need to know is we cannot work alone. Regardless if you're a researcher or you're an entrepreneur, you can't work alone. And Malaysia is really, we are so blessed to be in Malaysia because of the availability of funds, the availability of partners, stakeholders to basically waiting to assist us to move to the next level. So we can't work alone. Start knocking the doors, talk to people. So a collaborative network is very, very essential. So before we go to the interesting part, funding, let's look at what makes funding work, right? If you're going to apply for a funding, what are the parameters? What are the mechanisms or instruments that you need to make commercialization work? Because whatever we are going to discuss under this section is what the funders are going to look into. So as an entrepreneur, you are on Tuesday session, webinar 3, we had a very insightful session of how Dr. Yong has brought his research output into the market, and he has actually discussed about what it takes to be an entrepreneur. Of course, as an entrepreneur, you got to wear a different cap compared to a researcher. So you got to be very creative and innovative. Creative in a sense, we are all creative, right? As researchers, or else you won't be able to come up with all these research outputs. You won't be able to file so many publications. You won't be able to file patents and IPs. Yes, we are all innovative and creative, but how innovative and creative are we when it comes to the business aspect of it, right? So being able to be agile, being able to adapt. So now in the pandemic situation, some businesses may need to make a change. Sometimes your product may not just fit in one category or market segment. You may want to venture it out to probably initially you would have seen it into healthcare segment. But now you say, hey, it's not just healthcare. I can actually bring this to a different platform, basically to F&B's industry or 3D printing. So how are you going to be creative and innovative? How are you going to be in terms of your business plans, right? How are we going to keep creating and evolving our products to the next level? Active leadership and passion. So we have to have that active leadership in terms of guiding the team, right? Having a visionary mindset. So don't always just look at, okay, I nak dapat grant, I just want to have a grant now, and I just want to make this happen, make my first sales, and that's it. I want to just, then I don't bother. So we don't want that kind. Entrepreneur DNA is not that. We want an entrepreneur DNA means active leadership throughout, having full control, being passionate in whatever you do, the communication skills, how you drive your team. And then we also need to have lean innovation and be optimistic. So lean innovation and being optimistic is working within the resources. Sometimes you may get a grant, let's just say about 800K, right? So you got to keep that and strategize your funding budget accordingly. Also work with whatever funding you have. Apply a lean approach because you need to keep the savings for rainy days or for mitigation risk, right? And being optimistic, always look at profit oriented. Be resourceful. So what we mean by resourceful means knock doors, talk to collaborators, talk to ecosystem, talk to industry players, look at other companies that you can actually joint venture with, or probably you can collaborate, work with some leading giants, in terms of looking at what the market needs, what kind of capability. So you can actually look into being more resourceful and getting involved in the ecosystem. Openness to embrace change, like I just mentioned, and also mistakes and change, mistakes, learn new things. So keep evolving, keep learning. So we have a lot of accelerator programs who learn about how to do pitching. If we make mistakes, that's great because you've got to learn from mistakes. You got to be a risk taker. And also always be profit oriented. Okay, so yes, I mentioned about being a visionary, applying lean innovation, but it has to be profit oriented or else you are going to lose. So if you're lavishly spending on resources, having a big grant, from the startup stage itself, big grant offices, not even thinking what is the profit, how can I multiply my revenue. So then, you're going to meet some stumbling blocks. So the entrepreneur ecosystem or the ecosystem development is actually comprises of these 3 pillars: accessible markets, human capital and education, funding and finance, support system and mentors, government and regulatory framework, cultural support. So by bringing all these pillars together, which we do have in our innovation and commercialization ecosystem, It's knowing how to tap them. So we don't just follow, but we got to localize as well. So funding mechanisms should be localized to meet demands and trends of local ecosystem. Policies and frameworks should be aligned to government aspiration, updated with current ecosystem knowledge-driven economy. So what we are saying is update our policy um, should be an enabling factor for the knowledge-driven economy. So basically, in this slide is what I'm trying to mention is we do a lot of benchmarking. We get lots of experts from UK, US coming and sharing knowledge, but does but not necessarily what works in UK or US will work in Malaysia. In fact, in terms of the cultural, in terms of the ecosystem, we are quite different. So we got to learn, but you cannot just follow and apply. We got to tweak that mechanism. We got to apply it accordingly to our local landscape. So what is the difference between licensing and spin-off, right? So these are some of the commercial vehicles that we need to know. And there is a slight confusion. The thing is, once as a researcher, we develop something, if your policy allows within your university to create a spin-off, you got to be very careful. First, weigh the pros and cons, right? So as a licensing mode, the time is quick and easy. It's relatively easy to do the deal and that's it. Okay, the rest you just leave for royalties to kick in. So the university side bears the patent and legal cost, and we look at just the in terms of income for returns, and the risk is rather low, and the commitment is basically only at the start, and the control is very minimum, just the IP. But if you're looking, and then you license your IP to the industry, you wait for the returns to come in, and then you are happy to go and do a research. So then you have an auto run vehicle, the licensing deal for 3 years, 5 years, whatever income comes into the university. But in terms of committing yourself into a spin-off for researchers, it is rather time consuming. You need to understand what is required when you're creating a spin-off, in terms of setting up the team, setting up the capital, where are we going to get those capitals from, which investors, funders. You got to look at the long term, not just creating the spin-off and then being there for 2 years, but taking full control throughout the journey. And definitely the risk is enormous, right? So you are bearing the risk from the start to the end. So other factors that will involve all these are like university policy, having the right mindset to drive the spin-off, being a risk taker, investment, how are you going to sustain the business, the strength of the IP and technology itself. So if you're going to create a spin-off, make sure that technology and IP is really, really strong, and you do have the collaboration and market access to work and bring the whole technology to the next level. So, like I mentioned, there is a huge gap. Everyone's working in their own bubble, but let's bridge that gap. So, got to work in a more of a collaborative network. So, researchers will say, I have a great technology. Market will say, that's not what we are looking, and your technology or your solution does not solve our problem. But this is a fundamental problem across the globe, and that is why we got to work in a very collaborative environment. When it comes to IP strategy, what is the IP strategy that funders or will look into, or when we are strategizing our business? All right. Align the IP strategy with the commercial strategy over short to medium term. Identify the suitable commercial mechanism of exploitation. So in short, right, I'm going to explain. You have an IP, or you have an idea and you want to file the IP. How is this going to align with my business strategy, right? Okay, so is this going to be a licensing model? Or am I going to create a spin-off? Is this going to be a JV? Who am I going to collaborate? What kind of value does this IP has? Can it raise enough, investment? And what kind of territories I should go into? How big? So sometimes having the IP, it can be an open platform, or you can just license or manufacture one small component of the technology and supply to big, probably you may just come up with a small uh, lining, nano lining, for example, or sealer, right? And you can actually just develop that and then go into a licensing mode, and you can license to various semiconductor players. And from that you just generate huge sum of money. So it depends on the strategy. And also, are we looking at a global IP protection? How much are we spending? So budget is very, very crucial as well. But IP actually allows your business to be sustainable and stay ahead of competition. So what is technology readiness level? Yeah, we always hear TRL. Oh, so your technology is at what TRL? So TRL means technology readiness level. And so we have TRL1 at basic principle, TRL2 formulation of concept, TRL3 experimental proof of concept. So these are usually at early stage. TRL4 is at lab validation, okay? And TRL5 is validation in real environment. So this is where you can work with an industry partner to do a pilot. First phase of pilot project. Then you do a demonstration in a real environment. So maybe you want to deploy this in a real environment, at a client side and so forth. Demonstration of prototype in a commercially viable aspect. TRL 7. TRL 8 is product complete and qualified. So by TRL 6, you should have your certifications. You should have the regulatory approval, right? Because you are now going to demonstrate in the real marketplace. So product complete and qualified. And TRL 9 is when the product is proven and it's ready for a full commercial scale. So as you see, government and industry investment comes throughout. So government actually puts investment from the time of TRL 1 right up to TRL 5. But also there is an overlap to TRL 6, and the industry, like venture capitalists, private equity firms, they like anything after TRL 8 and 9 because it's proven. So what's commercial readiness level? In here, we don't quite talk about commercial readiness level because commercial readiness level come at later stage of pre-com or com, right? Commercialization. So these are both TRL and CRL are used as barometer for funding bodies to assess the development stage of a product or solution. So commercial readiness level is a combination of technology readiness level and market readiness level, whereby CRL1 is known as hypothetical commercial proposition. So here is where you do your market assessment feasibility study. So you're sure, and you engage some industry experts and users, end users to get the proposition right. Then CRL2 onwards actually starts from TRL8. So you got to get the whole technology ready, commercially, potentially viable. That means it's ready to push out. So that's where onwards the commercial readiness comes in. So commercial trial, small scale. CRL3 is commercial scale up for, probably you're venturing into few market segments. Global market rollover, CRL 4. 5 is market competition, driving widespread development and bankable assets. This is where IPO comes in, right? So in some contexts, you will know as CRI, that means Commercial Readiness Index. So market your innovation, there will be two types of active and passive. So connecting people, strategic experiences very quickly, and also the conventional, having promoting on websites, publishing technology profiles, and just waiting for someone to knock. But you can actually combine the active and passive models together to have a more pragmatic marketing platform, right? So usually who does this in universities? The technology transfer officers. where they will be the market linkers for the university to other industry partners. And there are various defining stages when it comes to funding a business. So ideation stage are the early stage of company. The product is still under development. The seed stage is the focus where the product is towards a commercially scalable product. And so the product is in the beta test phase. The company raises funds from various channels. So investors here can also be government funders. Yeah. Early stage is the product is officially launched and it's ready, so it's getting into the market. The company has started generating revenue and a small customer base, right? Growth stage is where the company has acquired a large customer base and generates significant revenue. So growth stage would be mid-tiers, yeah? That's where the VCs are interested to look into. And late stage is the company records positive cash flow and introduces the product in tangible markets, investors seek liquidity. So that's where the IPO works. So these are the various stages of a business. And when it comes to business model, funders will ask, okay, what is your business model? So you need to strategize what business model are you operating for your solution or technology or you're designing for. So there are a few, such as marketplace. Amazon uses marketplace. Sponsorship, like YouTube and Facebook. So site views, average pages per session, lead generation, number of clicks and shares. Disintermediation model is like the big basket. So it has the gross order value, repeated customer orders, customer acquisition. Subscription, you all know, like Zoom, so average revenue per user, monthly recurring revenue, customer lifetime. Premium, okay, this is very common, and also expensive asset lease. So asset lease is that rents out costly asset at high margin. So you see your solution or technology that you're developing can be fitted into maybe not just one model, it can also be a combination one or two model, right? So business canvas, this has been covered in our last webinar. So it is basically to map your business and to go through the process of making connections between what your idea is and how to make it into a business. So start with the value proposition. And sometimes you may not want to work business canvas all by yourself. Get someone else in your team. Two heads are better than one. So get into a group and start discussing. And the sections that we look into is like key partners, key activities, key resources, value proposition, customer relationship, channels, customer segment, revenue stream, and cost structure. You may also want to do SWOT analysis when you just before you do the business canvas, or you can also do together, right? And identify, okay, what are my strengths in terms of technology? What are my weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? So you may want to complement that, and that will also assist the development of your business canvas. Market validation. So this is the gap that all of us experience, and user engagement. So your most unhappy customers are your greatest source of learning. So this is something that one of my favorite quotes from Bill Gates when it comes to technology development, because we don't get enough responses. I don't know why. Probably number one, it could be very difficult to get end users engaged. We do not know how to approach them, right? So get them involved, make an introduction, there are a few ways of market validation, such as surveys, focus groups, data sampling, or any sort of sampling that is related to your technology that will give that impact and results. Testing, do a techno-economic feasibility study and also market feasibility study. Sometimes technologies work great, but that doesn't mean they have a market. So you got to remember that, yeah? So the next is the much awaited sources of funding. So here, I must say, identifying the right funding channel or the right funding product to support your innovation or your technology development can be incredibly time-consuming, stressful, and confusing because we don't know which door to knock. Sometimes you may waste your time by going and applying for the wrong funding channel. So you got to be very careful. Now we've understood all the nuts and bolts that is required to help us to be commercially ready or to prepare us for a funding application. So what we need to understand is the Malaysian funding ecosystem is very vibrant. I have to admit, we are so blessed with so many sources of funds, right? But how are we going to tap these funds? How are we going to collaborate? So most of these funders, they need industry or you must be an SME. Okay, so as researchers, now you will be wondering, oh my God, so how are we going to commercialize? So licensing could be one of the option or a spin-off, but you have to be an entity, right? Or work with an entity. So working with an entity doesn't just mean you are just licensing it out. You will also work with an entity where you will enjoy in terms of income from technical assistance, advisory consultants, licensing, royalty, and also having a continuous sticky effect with the licensee. Yeah. So we have public government funding, private funding, and loans. So public funding, as you already know, we have under MOSTI a few government agencies, Cradle, MTDC, MDEC, Magic, Taraju, and few others. MIDA comes at later stage of commercialization. Private funding like venture capitalists, angel investors, private equity, bootstrapping, and also crowdfunding. I've also included loans because it's a form of financing. So soft loans and also debt venturing. You also have actually, interestingly, I just found out the Young Entrepreneur Fund. Maybe you want to check it out. Bumiputra Enterprise Enhancement Program. Soft loan for SMEs, Business Startup Fund, and also soft loan SMEs for services. So the fundraising journey for companies start from the proof of concept, business plan, prototype stage, right up to mature companies. So different funders, different programs of funding will come at various stages accordingly, as you can see on this slide. So how are these supported? Is MOSTI came up with the recent 1010 MySTIE framework 2021-2030. So this new policy basically introducing science, technology, innovation, and incorporating economy to positively impact our socio-economic transformation towards a knowledge-based economy. So if you have, in my previous slides, I've been, basically putting some importance on collaborating. So why? Because the new framework basically is a collaborative network platform bringing together diverse stakeholders in the ecosystem to improve our country's innovative and creative capabilities. So MOSTI, together with Academy Science Malaysia, has come up with this new framework basically driving technology commercialization as an integrative tool with 10 key socio-economic drivers and global leading science and technology drivers for government, researchers, innovators, and industries and community. So this is where university researchers research output that is aligned with these 10 socio-economic drivers will be very beneficial. And there are many agencies that will be collaborating in this platform. Okay, so it's time for technology transfer officers to embark and find the sources accordingly and knocking the right industry partners, government agencies to come up with industry-related research that will have economic value and commercialization benefit. So the MOSTI funding scheme I have to mention here is, as of January this year, 2021, MOSTI has actually, there has been a change in the funding landscape. Okay, so there are many new products being introduced. So you will see new terms, and this session is to give you an insight of the various funding programs, the new funding programs, yeah, under MOSTI, Cradle, MTDC, and so forth, on how they can support technology commercialization. So MOSTI has actually introduced this dana or funds, the Dana Applied Innovation, the Dana Pembangunan Technology, starting from TRL2, Formulation of Concept. So now that's interesting, right? Then you have from TRL3, the Dana Penyelidikan Strategic, right? Looking also where universities can participate at both TED1 and also SRF. Then you have TRL4, the lab validation for technology development fund, yang Dana Pembangunan Teknologi, where also universities and startups and SMEs can actually be involved. And TRL 7, 8, and 9 onwards, we have Dana Bridging. So that's quite a new one. Yeah. So these are some of the requirements. You can also check this on the websites. So the SRF funding is applies more on the top-down approach, where the bottom-up approach is the other for new funds that they have actually introduced. Then you have the Cradle Fund, where we have the CIP Ignite 1, and for Deep Tech, there is up to 500K. For TRL 5 to 7, then you have a CIP Accelerator from TRL 8 to 9. So this is up to 2 million. So once you have actually developed, did the validation of the prototype, you can actually apply up to 2 million at a later stage for commercialization purposes. Now, how interesting, how beautifully that has been designed, right? Then you have for non-deep tech too. So it's not all about deep tech. We have non-deep tech. So for non-deep tech, it's also up to 500 under CIP Ignite 2. And the durations are stated. You can also check on their eligibility criteria and the timeline and what is required, right? So the eligibility criteria for this as well, you got to be Sendirian Berhad, 51% Malaysian owned, revenue of not more than 5 million, minimum 2 directors, minimum paid up capital of 10,000, not a subsidiary of a company or no other company holding 25% or more shareholding. All right. So if your university has a shareholding, so you may want to look into it for spin-offs out there. And also must have IP rights. So why did I stress out the IP strategy earlier is because of our funders. Then we will have this very interesting new, since last August, yeah, they have actually launched the National Technology and Innovation Sandbox. The secretariat members are Magic, MIMOS, EPM, and Futurize. And the funding body is actually MTDC. So there is a need for NTIS to address the nation's immediate and long-term economic needs. So they are looking at businesses to address these challenges in the medical technology, manufacturing, agriculture, education, and travel and tourism. So you've got to have basically a viable product that needs testing, okay, that needs to be tested and needs to be scaled up, where they will address sandbox and regulatory issues for this funding channel. So the type of fundings under NTIS available via MTDC is the 4 types. Sandbox 1, maximum financing amount is about 250. It's a full grant. Sandbox 2, 500K, and it's a partial grant. And Sandbox 3 is commercialization fund. Okay, so the earlier 2 is about more about validation and scaling up. 3 is about commercialization in the form of hybrid funds, grants, and convertible promissory notes of 4 million. And Sandbox 4 is the matching fund with investors or corporates. So if you have a corporate partner and they want to put a matching fund for your innovation, so you can look at this. And MTDC is looking at has all these various funds, the Halal Technology Development Fund, then you have the Business Startup Fund, Business Growth Fund, then you also have the P2P lending financing platform, MTDC Pitching Equity Crowdfunding, and also NTIS. So what is TPM? TPM does not of funding, but TPM is a market and technology linker. So this is where they can actually fit in quite nicely during the, where we identified during that time. So that taking the technology to the next level and collaborating with industry partners. So they have two: early adopters, forward linkages, and open open linkages. So what is early adopters is basically they are emphasizing on government procurement and government linked companies, GLC, to provide priority and to be the main purchaser to products, technology, solution, or services developed by SMEs, incubators, or local startups. So this is an effort to commercialize R&D products from universities and research institutions. Open is basically promoting commercialization with a more structured industry involvement, while encouraging the local use of R&D results in enhancement of the industry capacity and capability. So start talking to TPM, start seeing who can they introduce you for validation purposes. What kind of partners do they have? They have so many incubators that you maybe want to do an industry collaboration with. And some of the facilitation that they provide is technology expert and IT support, funding, fund mapping support. They also have TPM angel chapters, crowdfunding, and linkages to funders. Infrastructure, so as you know, they have facilities, labs, machineries, and equipments where you can actually put your spin-off or also try out your plant or your capabilities. Market industry pitching, forward, backward linkages, co-incubation, and internationalization and market validation. So they actually do have a group of mentors that will coach startups, researchers, innovators to go into the marketplace. So in terms of private investment, there are a few categories that you may want to look into and understand. This is basically earlier stage of funding. Series A is once a startup makes it through the seed stage and has some traction. Series B, you build it up where the company is, is up and running, already found their product, market fit, and needs help to expand. So it's basically on the expansion. And of course, the amount, as you can see, it grows gradually. Series C is scaling. So commonly at this stage, companies are looking to expand into international markets, so more of a global rollover. That's where you will do a business valuation and IT valuation before going into an IPO and acquisition, which is in Series D. All right, and these are some of the amounts. Private investment, angel round, it only starts, it's between 50,000 to 500. So it can be in the angel investors, families, friends, and ideation to initial prototype. Seed round is 500K, half a million to 2 million. Angel investors and early stage VCs are usually involved to establish product market fit. Series A is about RM3 million to about 10 million, where VC take part in investing into these companies. And Series B is 15 million onwards, where later stage VC firms are involved for market expansion and global rollover. So companies will sometimes raise Series C and D, which involve a mix of both later stage VC firms in Malaysia as well as private equity firms. So for all this, you need to really have a proven track record of commercial sales, and also you have to show that you have the signed up as well as the valuation, the business valuation. So these are all at a later stage. So private investment in terms of private equity is basically capital invested in company or other entity that is not publicly listed or traded. So it's investment across all industry where it involves large deals. Okay, so it controls investing where they acquire a major stake or 100% company buyout. and it uses a combination of equity and debt. And the risk is, of course, private equity firms do not take huge risks, because if one single failed company could actually affect their financials, because they are betting or they're putting their money on a large amount, and the exit is usually mid to long term, right? The growth sources of growth is, as you can see, growth, multiple expansion, and debt pay down, and cash generation. For VCs come in this early stage to mid stage as well, mid stage, where they are quite selective on their industry compared to private equity. So they like to look at technology-based, biotech, clean tech, and so forth. So it's all technology-based industries. So VCs only acquire minority stakes, and they use equity, yeah? And they invest in early stage companies that are growing quickly. So they are looking at low hanging fruits, venture capitalists. And they like to spread their risk into different startups and companies, and they rely on the growth and companies' valuation um, uh, as it increases, and their exit is more on short term. So equity, crowdfunding, and P2P financing. Equity is a method to raise funds via general public investors. So, you get a few group of investors, and they put into their deal into a platform called ECF. So in Malaysia, this took off in 2015. And there was a big launch, and it has been recognized under the Security Commission. So so be prepared when you're looking into equity crowdfunding as an alternative. Be prepared to go live and public with your numbers and business plans, because you've got to show it and present it. So it'll go on the ECF platform. For peer-to-peer financing, investors lend money to individuals and business through online. So basically, it's a lending platform, and the return of investment of P2P lending can be very high, about 10 to 18%. This is regulated by SC, but choose the proper licensed P2P. Don't just go, borrowing money from an unrecognized or unlicensed P2P partner. So these are some of the approved operators for equity crowdfunding and P2P. So you can actually Google, or you can, find. So what are angel investors and bootstrapping? Angel investors are high value or high worth individuals who are willing to put money into a well-developed business plan, prototype, beta testing, or MVP, and they can come from the start of founding, startup, pre-revenue stage. It's high risk investment. So in Malaysia, we have Malaysian Business Angel Network, so you can actually participate and get into their pitching program. Bootstrapping, basically using your own money, okay, to come up. So most of the bootstrappers are part-timers, and they have full ownership and retain equity and limited and long sum by bootstrapping. Of course, I think he borrowed his money from his mom, a couple of thousands and so forth. Spanx, it's a women garment company where Sarah, the founder, actually developed the whole idea right up to commercialization stage through a very lean method and using only her money. So we do have some success stories of bootstrapping. Then international funders and investors. So I mentioned that this presentation, today's webinar is basically for the Malaysian context, but we do have startups, we do have funders and investors, VCs for international, where you can participate, in the international arena, yeah. So, but be prepared to share IP in some cases. You got your equity gets diluted, allows you to grow your network, however, increases visibility in a more global platform. It increases business opportunity and ensures ensuring that you protect your terms and IP for when you're talking to all these global VCs, venture capitalists and so forth. Yeah. So the LIF program model consists of in-country training events. So these are more on research, based projects, but for more on community, but they do also have some form of towards commercialization, I was told. So it's a UK-based entrepreneurship training and networking program to provide an opportunity to connect with global LIF community. They give one-to-one expert training. And also, I understand that they do have an incubation where you can actually travel and you can actually go to the respective country in UK and, discuss with those guys and incubate your idea and grow it there for a duration of time. So biogenes, why biogenes? I would like just to explain is is a company that I first met in 2015 while I was working for a funding for an innovation agency. So biogenes is founded by Tan Kok Man and Adrian, as well as Cheng Kim Sang. So I think most of you or some of you know them. And they have actually developed and commercialized the complementary and technologies and solution in the field of molecular diagnostic and genomics. So I remember when they first came, it was the molecular diagnostic technology for aquaculture and animal health sector. So they secured a pre-com funding to then take it to the next level of development. So they developed a platform technology with a combination of printed nano-coated sensors, immobilization of molecular probes and aptometers, a validated silicon design aptometer, whereby they licensed it from IUKL, right, to commercialize the aptometer technology. And Biogenes was also was quite strategic when they looked into their IP strategy, where they licensed one part of the technology, the aptometer, from a local university collaborator, but they also developed the other combination in-house, and some of these IPs, they kept it as secret. So as you can see, their business model here comprises not only a licensed patent, they have their own patents, and also a form of trademark and trade secret. And in 2020, due to pandemic situation, the company was agile. Okay, they were creative enough to venture into the healthcare, where they found an opportunity using the same platform technology the team built over the last 4 years. And the technology is currently matured and validated, and the next ongoing phase of this pilot production and trial with third-party collaborators for scaling up purposes. So they understand the importance of IP strategy. They knew it is important to basically be agile, be adaptive to the current economic and pandemic situation, and they also understood the importance of collaboration. So they secured, and they just did not sit at just pre-com funding where they secured from Mosty and Platform, but they went ahead with commercialization funding from Antler. It's a venture capital capitalist for USD 100K for development of COVID digital rapid test kit. They looked into commercialization fund for scaling up and production, and NTIS 250K. So why did I present this case is because they not only secured initial pre-com funding, but they also looked at commercial funding, and then they also looked at overseas funding, right? VC funding. So then they also understood the importance of collaboration, where they worked very closely with the local ecosystem with 30 collaborators from local and public university, as well as public research institution, and 5 industrial collaborators both locally and overseas. So it was important for them to achieve sales in order to demonstrate to investors the business capability and acumen. So VCs, private equity firms, they like to look at how much sales you have made. What was your track record? Okay, funders, government agencies would like to see, okay, who are your potential customers? Do you have letter of interest, LOI? So these are some of the elements that we need to understand. So coming towards the end of my presentation, the parameters for successful funding application. Why do most applications fail? right? We go for pitching, we apply application for grants or funds, and then you get rejected, can apply again, you have to apply again. So why? Because we are not correctly and strategically addressing what the funders are looking at, all right? So when you are discussing about the technology or business solution, so these are the sections usually the funders requesting information from, from the applicants. So technology business solution, you need to identify what is your problem statement and how is your technology addressing the problem statement. Okay, what is the value proposition not only to your company but also to the industry, to your potential market segment, and it will be fantastic if you can show the value proposition to the entire ecosystem, to the country as well. So then you look at, they'll ask, do you have IP? Okay, what in terms of the IP ownership? Is it owned in-house, or is it licensed, or is it joint venture with another company or a third party? So you need to identify and also explain what's the strength of the IP here. Okay, don't just mention I have patent. Okay lah, you have patent, so so explain the strength of this patent. Why is this viable? And is this just the Malaysian IP? Is your patent going to expire in another 2 years? Then I'm not going to look into funding your technology, So you need to identify the strength of the IP. Then, of course, come up with the company background, management team, and financial background. If you're a researcher, work with an entity. If you're a spin-off, then you explain that about all this of your spin-off. Then you have market, business potential, revenue projection. Always back this up with real data. Don't just plug numbers, because funders, whoever assessing your application, they are smart. They do their due diligence. So you can't just plug some numbers and say or give a very vague information. So that's where most of our applications fit, right? So you got to have a very strategic market plan, strategic potential target market. How is this backed up? If you're saying it's 3 billion market, all right, why is it 3 billion? Based on what? You got to back it up. Business potential, revenue projection. Have a realistic revenue projection, usually 3 to 5 years. Okay, and how are you going to do that? By assessing the cost analysis, right? And business potential, look at the business model. What's the commercial strategy? Are you going to work with distributors? Is it an open platform? Are you going to work with manufacturers? Or, so look at that. Is this going to be through a licensing model? So work on the viable business potential. It has to be convincing. Of course, stage of development is very crucial when it comes to funding application. You don't want to file, basically with TRL 2 or 3. No funders would like to look at that. So it has to be on a healthy scale of TRL, usually 5, 6. But like NTIS, they look at 6 onwards. As you saw, Cradle, 5 onwards. So you have that healthy, you need to be in that healthy TRL space. Collaborators, potential customers. Of course, if I'm going to invest my money on your technology or solution, how are you going to convince me that once you develop, who's going to take it up? So you need to show them, who are you collaborating with? Do you have a letter of interest, letter of intent with a particular customer or a few customers that once you have developed, that you can actually commercialize this and make the sales? Then I am convinced to put my money, because I know you have secured a market. Then, of course, coming up with a good pitch deck. Don't make your pitch deck very technical. Don't make your pitch deck into a very research oriented. It has to be very business oriented, looking at addressing all these segments that we just discussed. Pitch it right. So Dr. Yong earlier in webinar 3 actually explained all the elements of pitching, right? The 4 factors. Today, I'm just going to touch very briefly what you need to look into. So you need to understand the rule of thumb for investors is that for every 100 investments they make, only 10 will go big, right? So if you want them to show you the money, you got to work towards it. So your elevator pitch, time it right, 10 minutes. Don't drag it with so many technical jargons. Tell them that why, convince them with an engaging story, research your audience, explain exactly what is unique about your product or service, have a documented succession plan, know your revenue model, and also do you have secured or potential buyers, and what is your exit strategy? So if you're going to go for VCs, PE firms, they look at that. All right. And practice your pitching. Maybe you want to practice it with another person or someone who actually had the experience of pitching. Discuss with them. So I want to conclude my presentation with the Upin and Ipin story. I think this is a very good case of a Malaysian business that has actually successfully spun off their IP into a total value chain of business proposition. So how they have actually evolved from animation business right up to merchandise and F&B outlets, right? So it started from Haji Burhanuddin, the owner of Lescope, and that's the company, yeah, the production company of Upin and Ipin. So the idea basically sparked from the works of a group of graduates from a local university. So while he was discussing with them, he saw an opportunity on their work. And then he found there's a gap and also demand, because back then the animation industry was still very new in Malaysia. So it was just picking up. And so what he did was he actually conducted a market research. So he was quite strategic. He was very far-sighted. He actually took the trouble to visit animation studios in US and Europe and UK as well to look into what is being developed. How is the whole business is being developed? So then he realized characters, yeah, is very important. And he also noticed that being in Malaysia, in this part of the world, it is very difficult to compete with them. So he came up with a blue ocean strategy. He came up with a local animation character that addresses the appetite of our culture, right? Our kampung Malay culture, and that was, we didn't have that kind of animation in terms of quality. So then he worked with his team. He came up with a factory model lab, okay, that allowed all these um, um, aspiring animators to come on board, and they developed characters. And he did the technical validation. So do you know why Upin and Ipin does not have hair? That is because he was that is because by developing the hair in the character, it was very tedious. So with just one strand, that made the technical validation more easier, and the animation characters to appear more easily animated. So he used the IP strategy where he learned from his studies from all those animation studios. So he protected the characters, the story, titles, and logos. So he had a portfolio of IP. And the launch of the strategy was also very crucial. Upin Ipin was actually launched back in 2006 during Hari Raya season, right? So it was a big hit. So he planned each of his launch of new characters very strategically. The studio protected all the characters or their work, animation work, through trademark registrations. In Malaysia, Lescope has about 11 trademark registration in various classes, which include Upin and Ipin Carnival, Gang, the World of Gang. And then, of course, he didn't just stop there. He looked into domain protection on all his social media, right, of Upin and Ipin, and online stores. So that was protected under copyright protection. So how did he capitalize? his revenue generation actually came from licensing agreements for derivative work such as TV programs and books. And also, he was very strategic where collaborative network was very crucial. So he did his branding strategy with partners such as Telecom, Carrefour, KFC Corporation, UNICEF, and also Disney accordingly, and also many other brands, but these are the big ones. And to date, Upin and Ipin has gained a global traction, and I think one of the biggest market is Indonesia. So with that, I would like to end my presentation or my webinar session today. If you're not creating value for others, then you are wasting your time. So commercialization is not just only about generating monetary value, but also creating value to the society. Thank you, and over to you, Dr. Jasper.